Hi, I'm Bart Hanson. I'm the owner and lead instructor for CrushLivePoker.com. The following hand comes from our call-in show that we record live at 2 p.m. Eastern Time every Monday. If you enjoy this video, hit that like button, and if you want to submit to be on the show, take a look at the information in the description. And sir, you're the one with the out-of-turn action, right? Is that right?
Yeah, Bart, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. And this is one of my biggest pet peeves, too, in poker as well. Are you from the Boston area?
No, I grew up in Cambridge, but
Oh,
now I'm
okay.
in Bay.
Now you're in what?
I'm in Bay. I'm in the Bay Area.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. I'm from Reading originally. All right. So was this hand played at Matrix or something, or what?
No, it was at the Oaks.
Oh, at the Oaks. Okay, a place I've never been to. All right. So Oaks. All right. And what was the game?
This was 1-1-2.
One.
And it was a full
two.
ring.
All right. So 1-1-2. Full ring. Okay. Nine-handed. Yep.
All right. So the background is a couple hands before. I lost a huge pot in all in, and it was like a runner, and yeah, I just lost a huge hand, and it was two hands afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in the big blind. And I was going to put more money in, but I only had 140 at that time.
Okay. So you didn't rebuy or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to rebuy a couple turns later, but yeah. So I had 140 on big blind, and the way that I was seated, I was in right front of the dealer.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway.
So you were in seat 5 or like in seat 1?
I was in
Seat 5, right
one,
across
two,
from the
three,
dealer.
four. Yeah, like C5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Which is my least favorite seat,
Yes.
by the way, especially playing 10-handed. I hate it. I always draw that in tournaments. Oh, it's the worst. You got to watch out. You have to watch out when you're in seat 5 because, like, it's a struggle. Like sometimes poker, especially in tournament poker, can be, like, a little bit relaxing because a lot of this shit is, like, no-brainer, especially when you get short. But I feel like when you draw seat 5, it's a chore because you have to protect your cards from 4 and 6, and it's just a pain in the ass. But anyways, okay, so you're in 140, so you're in for 140 in the big blind, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just before I start, I play this hand like shit. But anyway, so I'm in the big blind with two red kings,
Okay.
and the under the gun he calls
Okay.
UTG1 plus +1. He raises to 4.
Kind of small.
it gets
So
called-
he min raises, huh? Over the
Yeah,
top
he
of the
min
limp.
raises, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was, she min raises to 4, and then it gets called all the way around to the button.
Okay.
Who raises to 8?
This is no limit, right?
Yeah, this is no limit. Yes.
All right. So like 5 or 6 callers, button raises to 8. So raise to 4 from +1, 5 or 6 callers, button raises to 8, and I hope you really lay the hammer down here in the big blind.
Yeah. So small blind. Small blind called.
Okay.
So I'm on the big blind. So
Yeah.
I was gonna raise to 40.
Okay. So you're going to raise to 40. I mean, you only started with 140, so I don't think that's that bad. I mean, you'd almost, so normally you'd want to make it, 3 or 4 times from out of position plus all the callers, so it'd be more, but you're already putting in like 130 your stack anyway. So this is a case where, and I've done some stuff on this recently with, in some of my training material on Crush Live Poker where, theoretically, you're not really supposed to put in more than 1/3 of your stack pre-flop because if you do, the other person knows that you're never folding because you're going to be getting such good pot odds. So theoretically, you're supposed to either make it less than 1/3 so that there's the illusion of fold equity or just move all in. But as a live exploit, especially in small stakes play, I do it all the time because it doesn't matter. You just want the action. You can raise it more than 1/3 of your stack. The guys will call anyways. Whereas if you shove, they won't.
Yeah.
So you try to have them hit top pair. It's not rocket science. But anyways, so you raise to 40. I like that with your stack size because you're short. I might even make it smaller.
Yeah.
I might make it like 35. I might try to get the whole table to call. Or 3 or 4 people. I mean, if you made it 35 and you got 3 or 4 people to call, the pot's going to be like 170. You're going to have 100 left. You're just going to go on any flop that doesn't have an ace on it, which is fine.
Right.
It's like, but anyways, okay, so you raised to 40. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I raised to 40 because I figured everybody was gonna call if I raised to 20 or 25.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to isolate. So then I raised to 40, and then the under the gun person, he called 40.
Okay.
But then, like, here's where it gets weird. So the original raiser and the person next to her, so the UTG +1 and the +2,
Yeah.
apparently, like, they already called the 8 that
Okay.
the button had raised.
Uh-huh.
So they said when I raised to 40, and then the UTG called, they started saying, hey, like, we already called the 8, so you can't raise.
That So once again, I don't know if you saw my thing on the angle thing from last week. Last
Yeah,
week
I
this
watched
guy,
it last week.
yeah, last week this guy was like, I mean, that was the brute. That was, I mean, like I said, that most people think that's cheating. Okay, this sometimes is an angle, and what I mean by this is I've seen this before, and it really should be sort of handled by the floor. These whole like live things, like one of the other things that I feel fairly strongly about, especially as a for-profit player, but a lot of people
Yeah.
will actually disagree with me here, is that most of the time when people call other people out on string raises, it's an
Uh-huh.
angle. And what I mean by that is that a string raise, of course, like the purpose, a string raise, the purpose of a string raise rule is that somebody can't put out like a portion of a bet. Say they're going to bet like 100, so they only put out 50, and then they sort of look around for people's reaction. That's the
Hmm.
purpose of a string, so that you can't string bet or string raise, or a string bet, so that you can't gauge the reaction of the other people while you put the bet in. You have to put it all in at one time. 99%, if not more, of the time when a string raise is called, the guy did it by
Uh-huh.
accident. And the other player
Yeah.
knows the guy did it by accident and calls it on him because it's to his advantage. There isn't a more clear cut angle. People can be saying, oh, that's the rules. Bart. Like I said, the rules are not black and white in these scenarios. I've seen exactly what you're talking about happen to before, where somebody acts out of turn, and then the floor guy, maybe he's new or he doesn't really fully understand the rule. Like, let's say that two people act out of turn. Let's say that I'm in the hijack, right? And there are and
Hmm.
I'm the pre-flop raiser, and maybe the cutoff and the button called. Okay,
Yeah.
so I raise pre-flop, they call, and now the board comes out, whatever it is, right? And maybe the big blind's in there too. So the big blind checks to me, right? I haven't done
Hmm.
anything, right? I'm next to act, and I'm on the hijack, and then the cutoff proceeds to check, and then the button checks. I haven't done anything. Now,
Yeah.
if somebody who doesn't understand the intent and the purpose of the rule were to look at the rule book and said, well, two actions out of turn or two actions are now binding. So can the cutoff on the button just check behind when I haven't done anything, when I'm the preflop raiser as the hijack, and make it binding because it's two actions? That's what it sounds like, seems like what
Hmm.
happened to you here. But this is even more clear cut. You haven't even done anything, right? Like, you haven't even called. So the
Yeah.
action
I was like,
absolutely should be walked back to you, and you should be able to have your option. Because if that is allowed to go on, where two people, when you haven't acted, can act behind you and then make it binding, what happens to your hand? You haven't called. Is your hand dead? Are they trying to muck your hand because the two people called out a turn? Do you see how stupid that is? So that's
well, I
why.
almost mucked this hand.
So what happens? So what happens? Like, what was the rule? Like, well, how could it
So,
possibly be that you are only allowed to call if the two people who acted out of turn can call? Because the logical thing would
yeah.
be your hand would be dead because you haven't done anything.
Right.
Which of course we know that's not the case, right?
Yeah. So, like, I mean, I've seen this happen before, and, like, they would just take the chips back, you know?
Yeah,
And the dealer, like, his English wasn't that good. So
yeah,
then, like, I don't know, these two people, they just, like, kept on, like, making a scene. So then the floorman came over, and the dealer was trying to explain the situation,
yeah.
but he wasn't, like, doing a good job,
Right,
like,
and that
explaining the
happens a lot.
situation.
Yeah,
So,
that happens a lot in California, right? Because there's a lot of
yeah,
non-native English-speaking dealers, usually like Chinese,
yeah,
mostly Chinese. So you know, and then the problem too. I get frustrated. Like, listen, like here's the thing with a lot of these California dealers, and I don't blame the dealers. I'm not blaming the workers. I actually blame the management because I have dealt with California casinos for 15 years. They are the most apathetic, just a lot of them are family businesses, and the ownership puts like this middle management in place intentionally to be apathetic because they're making money in other areas through in the casino, and they don't want to deal with the headache of poker. So they intentionally put incompetent people to run their poker room. I've seen it time and time again. That then flows through the dealers, and the dealers are really bad. And I get frustrated because if you ever go to a home game in LA where they hire like these models, these girls who are like in their early 20s, these girls are better dealers in 4 weeks than an Asian guy at Commerce who's been dealing for 25 years. And what I mean by better is that they pay attention to the game and they try to enforce the rules like a good dealer. Whereas in these California clubs, they don't do that because there's no guidance. So anyways, when something like that happens, even when I'm not involved, I try to speak up to the floor and people trust me and be like, this is what happened. But I understand what you're saying. Like it can be frustrating, right? Because the story is not necessarily like told in an accurate manner.
Yeah.
So
I explained the situation to the floor man,
uh-huh.
and because I thought there was a misunderstanding,
Mm-hmm.
and he just tells me that the only option that I have is to call.
The only option that you have is to call?
Yeah. So I was baffled, and nobody spoke up for me except for the person who was on the button.
Okay.
And he also explained the situation. But he was like, either you call or you fold, and that was the only option that I had.
Yeah, and then the other thing too is that you get into situations, and I'm in, like I said, stemming from last week, I'm a proponent of having floor guys have discretion, right? Because of you can't rule by black and white, but at the same time, I absolutely have seen incompetent floor guys come and make the wrong decision. They don't necessarily, they're not going to like call, they're not going to probably call the supervisor over for a 1-1-2 game. I guess you maybe might have been able to ask that, but then like, it's like the play stops and all that stuff. Yeah, you're in a tough spot because it's like a lot of people like in your spot, if you're playing 1-1-2, they might not even necessarily know the rule, or they might think that they know less than the floor guy, right? Like you might think at the heat of the moment, well, okay, the floor's saying this, and that must be true. But then when in fact you think about it after the fact, and it's like, no, this was like terrible. But what are you going to do at the time? Whereas in higher stakes games, they'll just be like, that's fucking wrong. Like, call the supervisor. You know what I mean? Like, that's clearly like the worst ruling. But yeah, you absolutely should have had the option to raise. You haven't even acted yet. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that, and we've talked about this before here too, there's some weird shit that goes on in LA card rooms. Apparently the last time I talked about this, though, people had told me that the rules had changed, where I remember for the longest time, out of turn action was not binding. So you get into a situation where in your spot, these guys like check behind, that's not binding. But how about a guy who tries to raise behind you and he's doing it as an angle, meaning that like you went to 3-bet and now he goes to raise behind you knowing that you haven't acted. And now they say, well, out of turn action is not binding. Or even better, the guy checks out of turn behind you, or he bets out of turn. How about this? How about your head's up against the guy on the turn? You haven't done anything and you're out of position, and a guy bets when he's in position. And you're like, I haven't done anything. And then they're like, yeah, it's not your turn. And then now you check, and now he checks behind. That shit used to be allowed. I'm telling you, it's a Wild West. Now, I think I think that they've changed that a little bit, but definitely in your case, you should have been able to raise. So what happened? You ended up just being able to call?
Yeah, and just to add this, so the worst part of the floor man, like he needles me.
He
tells me that it's my he says it's my responsibility to like check the action.
Well, the problem with that is that, again, I don't think that that's I think you're joking when you say he needles you. I don't think he meant to like intentionally needle you. I think he's probably spouting off what he thinks the rule is. But again, he's like a robot in this case. Like he's not looking
Yeah,
past what the actual situation is where it can't possibly be your fault because if that was the case, then if I was to your left, I could just act out of turn all the time. Right? I could
yeah,
sit two people to your left with a buddy, and we could just continue to act out of turn and make everything binding, right? To your left. Oh, it's your
yeah,
responsibility to stop the action. It's on you. Check, check. Now what? Oh, we checked. Two actions. After you haven't done anything, right? So that's what I mean. Like
right,
it's just you can't have it that way. So
yeah.
what ended up
So,
happening?
so, so I almost folded, but I called, and everybody else called.
What do you mean you almost folded?
Because I figure if I'm gonna be up against like 9, 10 people, I'm gonna lose this hand. So
Yeah, but you could have called for like you could set mine though, right? you know.
I could, yeah.
All right, so hero calls, yeah, and then so there's like 8 people in the pot.
Right.
Yeah. So what happens?
So there's like what 72 in the pot,
Yeah.
and minus the rake. Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
then so I was gonna fold if any eight showed up or any like multiple like Broadway cards showed up.
Uh-huh.
But then it turned out to be Queen of Hearts, Six of Spades, and Three of Diamonds, like all rainbow.
Queen of Hearts, 6 of Spades, 3 of Diamonds.
Yeah.
And there's like 7 or 8 people in the pot. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just trying to do the math out. I mean, this was the main point of the call. I'm just trying to do the math out. So you basically probably have 2 pot-sized bets left, but you're up against 7 people.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that I would look at this is kind of I'm trying to think if there's ever a situation where you get into this spot. It's kind of rare to be so multi-way and only have a stack to pot ratio of like 2 because usually you might get into the spot like with 2 or 3, 2 or 3 ways at the most, but a board like this where no one really should have any 2 pair, I think you're pretty much golden. And the question is
Yeah.
how do you want to play it? I mean, you haven't really what I would say is that because you put up a stink and everybody knows that you want a 3 bet, that you did want a 3 bet, I would just come out and bet because it will
Yeah.
get
Because I was
checked. It will
saying
get
the
checked
card
through.
face up.
It will get checked through quite a bit if they knew that you wanted to 3
Yeah.
bet, right? So I would just come out and bet now. You know.
Yeah. So
So
the small blind checked, and I have 40 in my hand from the previous bet that I was gonna do.
right. Someone in the
Yeah.
live chat said you should just
So
open shove because people will think you're tilting. I mean, open shoving is probably going to get it. I mean, I don't think a queen's going to fold, but the problem with open shoving is that even at 1-1-2, if you make like some sort of gross overbet here, if a guy to your left has like queen 10 here and there's 7 people left to act behind him, and you're putting in like I mean that's a big bet, right? Like at 1-1-2, if you guy's going to call off $130 into like a $72
yeah.
pot with queen 10 with 7 people behind him, you know. But anyways, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I threw in whatever I had in my hand. I think it was like 40, and it gets folded around to UTG +1,
Yeah.
and she only had like 20 behind, so she called,
Uh-huh.
and it gets folded around to the hijack,
Yeah.
and he called.
Okay.
So he had me covered.
Sure.
So he called,
Right.
and it gets folded around. So it's just
So it's probably like
two other
one
people
set.
in the pot.
Yeah, so it's like 175 in the pot. Now you've got like 80 or 90 left. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's gonna go in.
Right. So then the turn was 9 of clubs.
Okay, so just get it in.
So yeah, so it was all rainbow. So then yeah, I go all in,
Uh huh.
and hijack guy he called,
Yeah.
and river was like a deuce.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Did you win?
obviously I lose this hand. No, of course not.
So what was the result?
The UTG +1, she took the main pot.
Okay.
She had a straight.
4-5. Right? 4-5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was opposite. Yeah. And the hijack guy, he got the pot with like a 2 pair.
Like queen
He
9 or
flopped
some
the 2
bullshit.
pair.
Oh, he flopped 2 pair.
Yeah, yeah, queen 6 like opposite.
Yeah. So there you go. So I can understand your reservation about how you thought you were gonna lose the pot because everyone was complaining on any two cards. But I would say, I mean, in your spot, there's nothing you can do, right? Like now, but I have been in situations where either I wasn't in the hand or I felt like the the floor made a bad ruling and I wanted clarification, but I wasn't in the hand and I didn't want to slow the game down. I didn't want to bring it up at the time during the hand. So sometimes what I would do, and I've done this maybe a few times at Commerce, like at some point, it doesn't have to be the same day, I might go over to the shift manager or the supervisor and be like, "Hey, I have a question." Don't don't be like, don't start the conversation like your floor man made like an idiotic decision. Be like, "Hey, I have a question. This happened to me in a game." And then you try to like make the story as short as possible where basically like I had a big hand in the big blind, somebody raised on the button, I tried to re-raise, but these two guys to my left who had limped in, they called out a turn and I hadn't done anything. And the floor guy came over and said that I didn't have a chance to raise. Can I have clarification on that? Like, I don't think you can be like, can you tell me what you would have done, or is that the right ruling in a nice way, and get clarification on it. So, I mean, I know what the answer is going to be, but that's sometimes how I've handled those types of situations before. It's not the worst thing you can do, and you don't sound like the type of guy that's going to do this, is like, and this is, you see a fair amount of poker players do this, which is why they're poker players, because they can't hold like a regular job. They argue in a very combative way that they're always right 100% of the time, even when they're not right. And then the people who actually make the decisions just aren't really listening to them, because there's, and if you put yourself in those people's decision making positions, you're just filtering these guys out. Because like, what, it's kind of like listening to Alan Kessler every day. Like, am I going to listen to him complain every day? I'm not actually. And then maybe like the one or two times where he actually has something to say that's useful, I'm not listening, right? Because like all the other bullshit that he says. So, you have to try to keep it as cordial as possible. But I think you were obviously unfortunate. I appreciate the call. Thank you very much. If you like what you've seen here, please hit the subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this call-in hand, hit the like button down below. To check out crushlivepoker.com, click on the link in the description. Use the code YTA300 to get the first 30 days for free.